Coming up on this episode of the Roundtable.
I just I don't see what the advantage is of like having just everybody fighting between Trump and DeSantis at this point. Maybe I'm off.
Well, there's not much of an advantage, and yet it goes on anyway. I mean, we're still sort of huffing the fumes of, the reality TV era, and even among, leading intellectuals, public intellectuals on the right, there's still this sort of like stubborn devotion to the idea that like if we just get the right narrative, if we can just tell stories that people like better than the ones that they're hearing, then we can somehow sort of get a grip back on the institutions or something. I mean, Jordan Peterson's new thing, ARC, which is, I guess, going to be the like, if the World Economic Forum was not like Lizards Anonymous or whatever, I don't know. Just doubling and tripling down on the idea that like narratives still rule. And so whoever can craft the best narrative is going to win. And I just, would that it were so simple. I mean, you look around and you see what? You see many radically different narratives, which may not even necessarily be fundamentally different in terms of their presuppositions about how the world works and what it is to be human, but still positioning themselves as, the antimatter to whatever matter it is that they're going after. And there's no indication that kind of like, muscular agonistic contestation between narratives is going to yield the truth or the winning argument or the most powerful block or necessarily anything. We live in a time of virtualization. And when the people in charge of the regime are consolidating control and you can't vote them in and you can't vote them out, and you don't even know who they are most of the time, how is the narrative supposed to puncture that?
Hello, and welcome once again to the Roundtable, your weekly publishers and editors podcast from the American Mind. I'm your host, features editor Spencer Clavin, and I'm delighted to be back. Thank you very much to Seth for holding down the fort while I was away. Seth is joining us again this week, managing editor Seth Barron, along with editor James Poulos and publisher and president Ryan Williams. This is one of those weeks where it's like, what are we going to talk about this week, you guys? We've got to talk about this whole indictment drama, I think, with Trump and also between Trump and DeSantis. I would suspect that nobody who listens to this podcast has not seen something about this lately. Trump himself, as I recall, made noises about maybe getting arrested on Tuesday. This is Wednesday that we're recording this, and that has not happened, but it does seem as if the grand jury in Manhattan is poised to indict him. It's the DA Alvin Bragg who's leading this, and it seems to be based on the it is based on the Stormy Daniels stuff. So the hush money, the allegations that he paid her off to keep quiet, and so on and so forth. This is the law. The relevant law reads: a person is guilty of falsifying business records in the second degree when, with the intent to defraud, he makes or causes a false entry in the business records of an enterprise. And then there's another one as well, which might potentially make him subject to felony, which has a 5-year statute of limitations. The piece that I'm cribbing this from is on the Federalist. Indicting Trump will usher in America's Banana Republic stage by Margot Cleveland. So more on that if you like there. This is a rich text. There's just a lot to be discussing here. First and foremost, I mean, Bragg himself seems to have gone down this path, this legal rabbit hole, when it seemed as if the case was kind of cold and dead. He's a Soros DA, so obviously hostile to Trump, not appointed by Soros, but funded by Soros, and obviously kind of eager to get Trump, as so many people are. He's soft on crime in other areas. So people have been pointing out that, like, he's, while he's not pursuing actual problems in his area, he is trying so hard to get that picture of Trump in handcuffs that everybody seems to long for on the left. Trump, meanwhile, is on Truth Social talking all about the situation, and in particular, getting very angry at Ron DeSantis about this for reasons that are totally unclear to me. Maybe somebody will explain, what the substance of this is. I mean, so ostensibly, facially, the substance is that DeSantis is supposed to stand in the way of an extradition to New York. So DeSantis, governor of Florida, Trump in Florida, and DeSantis isn't doing enough. Trump says, among other problems, DeSantis isn't doing enough to keep Trump from being extradited, which he has not yet been. And which, as I understand it, I don't think DeSantis really could do. He could sort of demand an investigation into whether the extradition is proper. But I mean, this seems like a sort of a campaign thing. Between the both of them, it seems as if there's like a lot of. It seems like this is in some ways round one of the primaries around on the occasion of this, to me, much more concerning sort of political attempt to get Trump. I'm of two minds. We can talk about whether this is going to backfire or not. I mean, it seems to me like the latest in a series of attempts to weaponize the government and the law to just get that, to characterize Trump as the worst person ever, the great Satan who must be exiled from politics. Will they get him on this? Hard to say. I mean, it seems like a case that might fall apart once they've arrested him, but then maybe they will have achieved what they want, which is just this, they can say that he was arrested. They can get the graphics and the pictures. The latest that I have seen is that DeSantis now is in this interview with Piers Morgan talking about some of his criticisms of Trump. Unclear, at least to me, whether he recorded this interview before or after he knew about the pending indictment, pending arrest, but it all seems to be unfolding into a kind of back and forth between Trump and quote unquote DeSanctimonious. Here's Trump on Truth Social. While I am fighting against radical left lunatics, persecutors, and unfair prosecutors who want to destroy us all, Ron DeSanctimonious is not working for the people of Florida as he should be. He is too busy chatting with a ratings challenged TV host from England, desperately trying to rescue his failing campaign. But it's my fault. I put him there. I do. Man, it's just every time I think he can't reel me back in, I have to chuckle a little bit. It seems like we're really just going with Ron DeSanctimonious here. We're just going to stick with that and see if it sticks. But so this is the state of the situation. There's a primary drama around it. There is to me, much more serious sort of constitutional and legal drama around it. And I guess I'm going to open the floor. Oh, I will say that one other sort of insinuation that Trump has made is that DeSantis is making passes at like high school students and or men, which is kind of like out of left field, although he seems to, he linked to some Oppo research piece about comments that DeSantis may have made and so on and so forth. So you get the picture. I have talked enough already. I'm going to open it up to the team here. Anything that I've just said about my assessment of the situation strike you as wrong? Is there something more substantive to the Trump-DeSantis conflict, or are we what we're really worried about here? It seems is like the sort of banana republic of it all.
Yeah, about 6 months ago, I wrote a piece for TAM, kind of praising Alvin Bragg a little bit, because in the previous scandal involved Trump's accountant or, chief financial officer, Alvin Weisenberg, who was under like this endless investigation of the Trump organization. And it all came down to the fact that Weisenberg had, he'd accepted part of his salary in basically it came down to that he hadn't reported the value of like a chauffeured car on his taxes. Trump paid for his kids' schooling or his grandchildren's tuition, and it wasn't reported. Now, this is the type of stuff that normally at the state level is never investigated or never dealt with. It's usually dealt with civilly, and people just have to pay back the money. But they really went for it. And at a certain point, Alvin Bragg was like, you know what? We have limited resources. I'm not that interested in pursuing this. And a few top prosecutors in his office resigned. It became kind of a scandal. And I said, well, you know what? At least Alvin Bragg is true to his word. He came to office saying he was only going to pursue prosecution of cases that were like serious crimes, and he was going to let like a lot of stuff just skate. So, it seemed like, okay, well, I guess maybe he means it. Maybe he's not interested in wasting time just doing political prosecutions. Okay, well,
it was so generous of you, Seth.
Yeah, I was 100% wrong. I think obviously I think it's got to be clear that, this is all connected to the fact that like Biden is facing like a massive scandals, with like huge sums of money being filtered directly to his family from the Chinese Communist Party. His son is now, the whole laptop thing is completely been, essentially his son has admitted, yeah, it is all mine, and is countersuing because the guy, the laptop repair guy shouldn't have released it. But isn't that sort of what's happening here? Like they're just like trying to like divert attention from all of this. Clearly people are leaning on Bragg, but to me it seems like, I think maybe they're realizing this isn't necessarily going to work. Maybe arresting Trump, trying to put him on trial for this nonsense, this business with falsifying business records, that, it's completely tendentious to say, oh, this was a campaign finance violation. The Fed's already said, no, that doesn't hold. The whole thing is just, it's complete Brazilification of our politics. Or like, not even, it's like, I don't know, the Liberian version of our politics. It's atrocious. Well, that's enough for me.
Yeah, I'll just add, Spencer, to your list of details that there have been leaks that the office is kind of in turmoil. That is it's the county DA, right, Seth? The New York.
Yeah, it's the county DA.
I was told by someone, I don't know these things, that, for a long time, maybe it still is on paper, but it's basically the second most prestigious DA's office in the country behind the Southern District of New York, which covers Manhattan. But now it's sort of been brought low by the apparent mediocrity of Alvin Bragg. Anyway, his office is reported to be in turmoil. It's been leaked over what to do about Trump, with many suggesting, I think, as the same thing you have, Seth, which is that it's kind of ridiculous and a circus and might even be counterproductive. I suspect the only calculation in the leading offices or spaces of democratic politics is which course of action is the most useful to them and useful to Biden. So I agree that that's completely political, and who knows what the lower level attorneys may or may not think in Bragg's office. Even in a politicized office like one in New York, you still will have some decent and honest attorneys, especially at the lower levels. So who knows? Trump, of course, capitalized on it as best he could in his typical fashion, sort of suggesting it appears that probably that he or someone around him was the source, that he was going to get arrested Tuesday. He raised a bunch of money off of it this weekend. It's all fizzled out. It's being reported that Bragg has held off from an arrest today because his last grand jury testifier suggested that he was withholding exculpatory evidence, quite a bit of it, in fact. So the whole thing is a mess. And it's hard to know, like all media circuses around our national politics these days, especially on contentious issues where the partisan fight is the hottest. It's hard to know what to believe about any of this. It's kind of a hall of mirrors with leaks, counter leaks. It's all a mix of damage control and directed damage of one sort or another against the man who remains the main figure in our national politics still, which is Donald Trump.
Yeah, that is an interesting feature of it. That last thing that you said, Ryan, the just kind of undeniable magnetism of Trump as a figure, not only personally, but in people's imaginations. And even just now, as I was reading that Truth Social aloud, it's like, I thought that I wish I knew how to quit you. I wonder this about the campaign side of it all. You know, part of me thinks, Jesus, like, is this what the primary is really going to be like? Just this kind of weird deflection and insinuation. And I mean, DeSantis with Piers Morgan has sort of tried to be like, look, you can call names, you can sling mud, you can do all this stuff. But at the end of the day, like, I have the record, I have the results. And Trump, really doesn't at this point. And I would like to at least talk about that question. I'm not saying I want to, I'm not saying that I think DeSantis, that's the last thing you can say on the topic, but I would like to be talking in those terms in the Republican primary. But it also seems as if there is like a battle of showmen going on who can kind of slingshot these major events in our politics into like a better rhetorical attack on the other person. And part of me feels like I don't really want to have that fight. Another part of me feels like maybe there is something substantial about this battle of like charisma between the two people. Do you know what I mean? Like, is there anything to this fight between Don and Ron that actually does have weight and significance for who's going to end up, being our nominee?
Seems like such a waste of, I just cringe to see this stuff going on Twitter. I mean, and this includes people, in our orbit. And I just, this is what the primary is for. Why are we getting all this, why are we wasting all of this energy on these vicious fights between Trump and DeSantis? I mean, obviously, yeah, if they run against each other, it's going to be like, vigorous and whatnot. I don't know. I just find it a little dispiriting. I'd rather see people like, look, I know it sounds very cornball, but like, Reagan saying, oh, never attack another Republican, blah, blah, blah. Okay, maybe that's, maybe that's a little quaint, but I don't know. I just I don't see what the advantage is of like having just everybody fighting between Trump and DeSantis at this point. Maybe I'm off.
Well, there's not much of an advantage, and yet it goes on anyway. I mean, we're still sort of huffing the fumes of, the reality TV era, and even among, leading intellectuals, public intellectuals on the right, there's still this sort of like stubborn devotion to the idea that like if we just get the right narrative, if we can just tell stories that people like better than the ones that they're hearing, then we can somehow sort of get a grip back on the institutions or something. I mean, Jordan Peterson's new thing, ARC, which is, I guess, going to be the like, if the World Economic Forum was not like Lizards Anonymous or whatever, I don't know. Just doubling and tripling down on the idea that like narratives still rule. And so whoever can craft the best narrative is going to win. And I just, would that it were so simple. I mean, you look around and you see what? You see many radically different narratives, which may not even necessarily be fundamentally different in terms of their presuppositions about how the world works and what it is to be human, but still positioning themselves as, the antimatter to whatever matter it is that they're going after. And there's no indication that kind of like, muscular agonistic contestation between narratives is going to yield the truth or the winning argument or the most powerful block or necessarily anything. We live in a time of virtualization. And when the people in charge of the regime are consolidating control and you can't vote them in and you can't vote them out, and you don't even know who they are most of the time, how is the narrative supposed to puncture that? Donald Trump gets up and he says, hey, vote for me and I will throw these bums out who you can't throw out. It'll be the end of their rule. And okay, yes, please clap. You don't have to ask. Round of applause, standing ovation, whatever you want. It's a great performance. It's a great line. It's a great idea. But how do you actually do it? DeSantis is a guy who can say, well, I killed woke several times in Florida, and that's awesome. And another round of applause. And, work in progress. Can't wait to see what he does for an encore. Insert your performance metaphor here. But how do you do it at the federal level? Do you do it at the federal level? What does a real agenda look like? We can come up with, and maybe we will come up with, amendments that should be passed, or at least drafted. But the extent of the decay and betrayal of our constitutionally guaranteed form of government is so profound, and people are so dedicated to the idea that if they just perfect politics, perfect the regime in speech, then they can move on to taking actual control of the political apparatus. It is easy to just sort of sit back and shake your head. So, I think that these episodes are going to continue to play out. In some ways, this is like, congratulations, you invented politics, America. People just yell at each other, and then there's a winner, and hopefully it's not too corrupt, and we all feel good about democracy. This has been going on for a long time. So let it happen, because it's going to happen anyway. And to the degree that Americans at all stations of life and in and out of politics can sort of just lower the visor and head into the tunnel, endure it, and focus on taking real steps, from the local level on up, to actually regain some direct control over their affairs and their destiny, something that we do our best to cover at the American Mind, then I think we've got a fighting chance. But if you get lost in the funhouse hall of mirrors, it's going to be hard to find someone who can pull you out.
Yeah, it is really hard for me not to come out of these sorts of discussions concluding what you just concluded, James, which is like, keep your head down, think about like what the actual solutions are to the actual problems facing you, and let the circus be the circus, because it is going to keep going. And like, that is not one of the things over which most ordinary Americans have too terribly much control. I mean, I understand that this sort of clash has to happen between Trump and DeSantis. I think like it's, again, nothing that we do or say is going to avert that from occurring. I too dislike it, as the poet wrote about poetry. I sort of find it a bit unseemly, but whatever. I mean, that's like, who am I to sort of twirl my mustache and sip my Chardonnay and comment from the sidelines about that? I think, like, oh boy, it certainly seems to me like a distraction. It also, though, like, it's gonna be part of how people make this decision, like it or not. This is gonna be the air of braggadocio that either one of these guys is going to be able to cultivate around himself is going to be like part of the perception that people have of him as a fighter or what have you. So yeah, I'm not. As I've said multiple times in this podcast, I'm like leaning DeSantis and have been for a while. But at the very least, I'm just sort of like I'm watching in a certain degree of I'm wincing, but still watching to see like what the most prudent course of action is going to be for the party and who to get behind. I do think. I mean, tell me what you think about this, you guys. I do sort of suspect that this, if they do arrest him, it will sort of backfire, or it will help Trump rather than hurting him. And that may be part of the plan. Like they may prefer a Trump they may prefer Trump running to DeSantis because they have already installed in the minds of their base the idea of Trump as the great Satan. And since they have that idea firmly in place, they can now add potentially the picture of him in handcuffs to the pile, to that whole like cosmic narrative that can be a data point for those who already believe in it. But on the other hand, nobody who doesn't believe that narrative is going to be like drawn into it by like a Bragg indictment. And as a consequence, it might be that they continue. It sort of becomes another like Russian P tape, like it gets added to the list of truly outrageous and ridiculous things that they've done in an obvious effort to get Trump. I don't know what you guys make of all that. The prognosis for this as an effort on the Democrat side.
Yeah, I mean, I think they like. Okay, I'm in New York, and I know that the level of like Trump derangement syndrome is probably stronger here than maybe anywhere else.
Mm.
They are so crazy. They are so addicted to this idea that, like, why is he even allowed to walk the streets? Why isn't he in, like, he should just be in prison and nothing is too bad for him. And they're just completely addicted to this idea that, like, somehow he's going to be marched through lower Manhattan in an orange jumpsuit, bald, barefoot, like being like scourged and just like ridiculed, and with people throwing eggs at him. Like, this is really their fantasy. And it's just not going to happen. Like, it's just not going to happen. It's like ridiculous. And you know what? If they do get him into for a mugshot, which they keep saying, we just want a mugshot. He knows how to smile for a camera. It's just going to be like a picture of him smiling. They're not going to get it. He's not going to go spend a night in Rikers. They're out of their minds. So there's like a lot of fantasy. There's a lot of like stuff like this. It's just, I don't know if it probably will fire up Trump's base. It's going to open up a lot of people's eyes to the fact that, like, this is absurd. And, there's a moral hazard to it because, I mean, do we really want to be a country where, like, prosecutors just go and, I mean, everybody keeps saying, well, is he above the law? Is anyone above the law? It's like, you know what? Like, everybody's apparently above the law in America, unless they decide not to. So it's, I mean, Alvin Bragg's whole career is based on reducing felony charges to misdemeanors, except in this case, where he wants to elevate a misdemeanor charge of something that nobody's ever heard of before to a felony. And I don't know. I don't know if it would help Trump. I don't know if it would hurt Trump. I'm not even sure that the Democrats know what they're doing, that they're that smart or that calculated. I think, like I said, I think a lot of this has to do with the Chinese money flowing into Biden's daughter-in-law's account. Like, how do you justify that? How do you? Oh, well, she also was doing some work on behalf of, what? I mean, what is? Where does that make sense? So, I think this might just be very reactive, and maybe they're kind of having second thoughts about it. I don't know.
Yeah, I suspect it will backfire. But it's there was I think it was the event this morning or in the White House briefing room today, which I think illustrates where we are, which is that Peter Doocy asked Karine Jean-Pierre about the Chinese payoffs and Biden family members getting paid, and he basically asked her what they did, and she just waved it away as made up, more or less. I mean, by implication. So that's where we are, which is to say, both sides treat these sort of procedural, they treat transgressions by their tribe, whether they're officially in power or not, as just kind of fake. So it's just another saga in the post-truth, postmodern world of national politics. The big difference, of course, is that it's asymmetric warfare because the Democratic Party has many more resources, media, prosecutorial, et cetera, at their disposal to kind of throw wrenches in the gears of anyone trying to influence national life or enter public life or succeed in public life. So I don't want to say it's just kind of a tit for tat and everyone's guilty. I don't think that's a fair characterization of what's going on. But the question for me in the primary, Spencer, which we should state for the record, Ron DeSantis has not yet entered. It's kind of a wink, wink, nod, nod, open secret that he's getting in maybe after the legislative session in Florida. I'm not sure. Who knows? First debate, I'll remind everyone, will be in August in Minneapolis. I think that's right. And the first primary is not till February, so there's a lot of juice left in this squeezable orange. It's just the continuing circus of our national politics, and unfortunately, it begins to resemble more and more a unholy union between a sort of half a banana republic married to the largest media markets in the world in the United States, and the result is not going to be pretty. it will not redound to the benefit of our country or the health of our political system. So I think the intelligent and concerned citizens and elites, and I just use the elite term in the sense of folks who, like us, have access to bigger platforms and write about this sort of thing and have our day jobs partly consisting of, commenting on this sort of thing, whether people want to listen or hear it or not. We just have to figure out the way to do the least amount of harm and the most good, given our situation. And our current situation now is pretty corrupt late republic, and it's reflected in how we talk about national politics and how our two parties fight about national politics.
Yeah, that's well said. And the point about asymmetry actually brings me nicely into another thing that we did want to talk about. So maybe we can introduce this relatively much smaller, but also I think kind of interesting in many ways and revealing little moment that happened over the past week. And that is the internet kerfuffle controversy over the definition of the word woke. If you listen to this podcast, you have heard the word woke used many a time. And I actually think we have taken some care to define it from time to time, but we basically just use it on the assumption that everybody listening to us knows what this means. How could you not? It's everywhere. It's right in front of your face. This kind of seething neo-cultural Marxist effort to reduce everything to identity categories, to make totally radical new demands on the American public on the basis of a creedal conviction that racism is everywhere and identity is all. I mean, one could go on, but I'm not going to, because part of the point of this whole thing, for me at least, is that this is not a demand the demand to define woke is not being made in good faith. The whole thing starts because Bethany Mandel, who's an author of a new book, I believe it's called Stolen Youth, and it's about wokeness in education.
Co-author of a new book, right, Spencer?
Sure. Yes, Carol Markowitz. Yeah. Right. Thank you. Is the other author of this book. Mandel is the co-author. She was on a show called Rising, I believe, and that she was asked by one of the hosts to define woke. She froze, as she herself has sort of said, and many who have defended her will nevertheless admit, like, she just kind of locked up, as sometimes happens on an interview. I will say that I feel a lot of empathy for her, because this is like a personal nightmare of mine. Is like the only thing that people will remember of some appearance that you made on some show is that, like, you just totally blanked, and it happens. But the discourse, capital D, around this has become, on the left, conservatives are using this word, but it's really just a dog whistle for, like, they just don't like black people. And so they're saying woke to stand in for black people or gay people or whatever. And they can't define it. And it's like lazy, sloppy thinking. And they, just use this as a kind of slur to launch at anybody they don't like, and so on and so forth. Meanwhile, Mandel herself and basically every other conservative person with a platform or without a platform has now spoken at length about what woke is. And I think there are a lot of pretty clear, like, definitions out there. So it's not clear to me that this was indicative in any way of anything at all, except that it's kind of hard to do press for a new book. Like, there's a lot of interviews, you do them at great length, and you get tired, and sometimes you freeze up. Like this, it does not seem as if the weight that's being put on this by the left is being put on in good faith. And it also doesn't seem to me like there's any sort of definition that anybody could furnish that would make people then be like, oh, yes, like, now I see, you're right, there is such a thing as woke. Like, that's not what this is really about. Although another comparison that's being made actually on both sides of this is, like, of course, Matt Walsh's documentary, What is a Woman, made a big splash. And so people started talking about, like, well, the left can't define the word woman. And again, I'm obviously biased. It seems to me as if that is actually much more true. Like, there are many, many people who refuse to define the word woman or break down when asked. And this does seem indicative of a sort of philosophical poverty on the part of the woke. But, what else? I know we're running a piece about this, which people can look forward to on AmericanMind.org. I'd like to know what you guys think beyond just, like, this is another internet spat. Is there more to this that we can say?
Well, yeah, we have a piece that by the time this it'll run this week. A piece by Tim O'Brien about this question, and he says the right answer is that woke means leftist hypocrisy, which I think is reasonable. He also makes the point that the left's failure to answer what is a woman is it's not that they don't know how to it's not that they don't know the answer, it's just that they're not allowed to give the answer. Like they're ideologically, philosophically constrained from formulating from just giving the obvious answer. So whereas woke, if someone hesitates to give an answer, it's typically because they just haven't formulated it for themselves. It's not like there's an ideological or philosophical proscription on the right that says no, you may not answer that question.
Yeah, if Mr. O'Brien's answer is that it's leftist hypocrisy, I think I would have to, even preliminarily and ahead of us even publishing it, disagree quite vociferously. No, I think the descriptive definition would be it's the beating heart of the claims of justice on the left these days, or the leading edge of leftism's moral core, that is wokeism. And it's, lots of people have tried to define this, and there are various definitions that all pretty much work. But as Spencer suggested, it is the modern obsession with identity and its relationship to quote unquote systems of oppression or systemic racism or sexism or transphobism or whatever. Take the latest groupings of identity obsessions on the left and place them at the core of claims of justice in the American regime and their connection to almost everything that government does, whether it be distribute housing, admit people to colleges, pay reparations for past injustices, not just the sort of leading case, which is the descendants of former slaves, but all manner of reparations are coming to a theater near you. It's all those things taken together. And I forget who was talking about this. It was either a leftist sort of denouncing the right for basically since the 90s and since the right started wielding political correctness or PC as an epithet, that we go through successive decades and we trivialize and freeze and brand unfairly the latest claims of social justice and stigmatize them with glib terminology. So whether it's political correctness in the 90s or wokeism now, it's all sort of illegitimate word games from the right. This is a species of that, I think, that question. And it leads me to believe that as powerful as this apparatus of identity politics is these days, whether it be in the courts or higher education or scholarship or whatever, take your pick, of leading American institutions, Hollywood, media, etc. I think it shows that, as in the past, there's a certain weakness to it, or when you hold up for people the leading edge of it or its central claims. That is to say, maybe if you take maybe the most absurd, some of the claims of the quote unquote transgender community and its activists and theorists, that if you really kind of expose it for what it is and hold it up to normal America, they reject it. And so then you need word games from the left to deflect, to distract, etc. And I think the immediate firestorm that erupted on the left, especially on Twitter and elsewhere, with the response to, this leading theorist of the problem of wokeism, or one part of it, that is Bethany Mandel in the book she just wrote with Karen Markowitz. She can't even define it. So she's a fraud. The whole attack on the left is a fraud. That was the immediate narrative, and its ferocity suggests to me a certain weakness or hesitation on the left about the lasting political purchase of this project. Maybe I'm delusional, and it's already a fait accompli, and we have much worse to endure after this. But that was my initial. I mean, they doth protest too much is sometimes a useful way of viewing politics and media freakouts.
Well, I think you're not delusional. I also think part of this tendency to absolutize everything in order to kind of get a word in edgewise in the discourse, like it has to be no pessimism is totally wrong, you have to be an optimist all the time, or it's like no, it's all a lie, like embrace the black pills, like disappear. These things can be true at the same time, like contradictory things can be true at the same time. And I think what we're seeing with the decisions this regime is making about, Uganda passes some kind of legal measure that is, anti-LGBTQ plus, et cetera, and the White House, we have grave concerns. But it's the choices that they're making indicate that there are significant strengths and significant weaknesses to their approach. They definitely want to and are doing their best to consolidate technological and financial and cultural power into a small set of hands, not all of which are human hands, of course, some of which are the hands of algorithms. And that power is unprecedented. It is power that can be and is intended to be used globally, not just in the US. It is a regime form in the making that is fundamentally at odds with the kind of government that many generations grew up with and defended in the West. And yet, for all of these great sources of power and control, the weaknesses are clear too, both at home and abroad. I mean, you look around the world and you look at, how institutionalized, technologized wokeness is doing as a sales pitch. And the answer is not very well. You can't pretend that this hasn't been a factor in the way that almost all of the Asian countries are lining up in a cultural and economic bloc that is simply opposed to the one that America is leading. It's happening in Africa too, and some other places as well. And that is a clear sign that, on balance, the majority of the world's population takes one look at what it is that we are exporting, and they're saying no, thank you. And of course, that's true of many people in the U.S. as well. So it's not so easy as saying these people who are impossible to dislodge from power by voting, and these people who are making a false god of justice, and these people who are using technology as much as they can to eliminate citizen politics and to replace it with another system, they have the upper hand in some ways, but not in others. And that may make for a long and messy period of conflict and changing fortunes. Alexis de Tocqueville had something vaguely similar to say about Latin America, where he was compared to the US, it just seems like these people are going to be locked in a cycle of revolution and counter-revolution for a long time. So it has come to pass. And so there's a lot on the line here for the US, not just in terms of, preserving what's left of our founding regime and our constitutionally guaranteed form of government and ensuring that it can last through this digital transformation, but just ensuring that, we don't end up getting locked into this kind of sped up cycle of regimes where we just keep cycling through rival governments and would-be governments and revolution and counter-revolution.
Yeah, I mean, it's worth noting that the unattractiveness of wokeness as a operating system for our nation, both to our own people and to people abroad, is a major accusation that our enemies make against us on the daily in an effort to shore up their own power and sort of international unions and alliances. Xi Jinping is visiting Russia, and trying to make China the lead broker of peace between Russia and Ukraine. And the minute you start talking in these ways, you start to say, well, you're just a Putin apologist. You believe what Dugin and Putin say about America. But actually, no, what I want is for our enemies not to be able to make true accusations against us as part of their propaganda. And it seems as if one major, talking point, let's say, for those that wish to see America fail, that conceive of it as a fundamentally flawed or evil or oppressive force in the world, and the sooner it's gone, the better, is just to sort of point, to gesture vaguely and say, look at what is going on. You don't need to define woke when you can do that, because it's all around you. It's in the George Floyd murals that the Taliban have to paint over when they take Afghanistan over. It's that's woke, and it's our major cultural export. So our enemies aren't sitting around wondering what's the right precise definition that we can use? They're just sort of gesturing wildly with their arms everywhere and saying, let's do something other than that. And for all that I am, a staunch Americanist and deeply, opposed to whatever the Putin regime, like make whatever disclaimers you want, like I'll sign on to all of them. But this is why it's like people are kind of getting hotter on the collar and saying, like, bad guy though Putin may well be, he's like got a lot of ammunition to throw at us rhetorically, precisely because our elites have become captured by this absolutely lunatic creed.
Yeah, it's also on the topic of deflection. It brings to mind, last week. Did you guys talk at all about the BLM database last week? Forgive me, audience. I wasn't here and I haven't caught up.
No, we did not.
So we
should, please do.
Yeah, our Center for the American Way of Life, run by our friend and colleague Arthur Millick in Washington, D.C., had been compiling this large database of, I should state, because we state it on the page and we stated it in opinion writing about it, but people keep missing it for some reason, that it's the premise was, well, let's look at and categorize and sort of put out there for everyone in a nice, interesting, searchable database. If you go to dc.claremont.org, on the left-hand side, you'll see it, BLM database. It's very useful. You can sort by region, you can sort by industry. And we're trying to figure out just precisely the size of the dollar amount either pledged or given to Black Lives Matter and related causes. So all manner of sort of racial equity stuff accrued after 2020 and the big kind of national shakedown of corporate America and their guilt over the racial reckoning. And, we conservatively, and I say that because the McKinsey company McKinsey has sort of tracked all the stuff pledged or given to racial equity causes since 2020, and they came up with some number north of $300 billion. We arrived at 82.9 billion, I think was the exact number. But part of the left's immediate response to it has been to parse and say, well, look, this corporate body didn't give to BLM, they gave to, XYZ or XYZ cause. Whereas our point was, you're sort of missing the forest for the trees on this sort of thing. And the same thing's going on with woke. It's like, well, you have to define woke, and if you don't define it precisely, then you're a fraud. The BLM database, it's the claim was never, this is all the money that has gone to Black Lives Matter as an organization or its parents or parent organizations or whatever. These things come to stand for movements, and they channel pathologies of the wider society, whether it be liberal white guilt or whatever, and use it to their advantage. And our one comparison was, Ford Motor Company made $23 billion. I think its revenue was $23 billion compared to this large number devoted to Black Lives Matter and related causes. And so as a general matter, I think when your political or ideological opponents start to nitpick and parse and fact check you, like in the tendentious sense of fact checking, you probably have struck a nerve. And that's how we should regard both the challenge to woke and poor Bethany Mandel's moment on television. So I'm sure she would take back if she could. And something like this launch that we had last week, which ended up in, basically 34 articles of both denouncing us and also praising us. I'll state finally, I'll just finish. I think it's extraordinary, and our colleague Arthur has brought this up in private. It's really extraordinary that nobody had done this yet. It's, this is not the normal sort of work we do at the Claremont Institute. Lots of think tanks do this kind of data-driven resource stuff. We don't do it that much.
Indeed.
And it sort of grew out of Arthur's incredulity about none of this information being collected anywhere. It's sort of the monetary side to the freak out of 2020 and beyond, and it's impressive to behold, and not in a good way.
Yeah, that is a really good point. And this thing where, right, Ryan, you've basically said this, but it does amount to, and it's worth saying, it does amount to saying, like, you can't talk about this vast nationwide cultural project that has taken over the script of every major institution. Like, people who are woke, who believe in wokeness, make demands that presume that all of American history has been in error and a lie, and the entirety of our constitutional structure, our way of life, needs to be overturned and transformed. So whatever, I don't really like the word woke very much either. It feels kind of rhetorically clumsy, but pick a different word. Like, you can't make that demand and then also say there's no word for this because it's simply not a thing. Like, what the heck am I supposed to call it when people say things like the only remedy for racist discrimination is anti-racist discrimination? Am I just supposed to regard that as simply par for the course, run of the mill, like American discourse? It's like it's obviously not, and it's self-avowedly not. It presents itself as a radical departure from what the woke view as a mistaken and evil history. And if you're going to make that departure, then people are going to come up with a name for this intense and new ideology that you're putting on the table. So it basically has to amount to saying, like, it's not happening and it's good that it is. Like, you can't talk about what's going on right in front of your eyes as we do it to you, as we overturn every precedent, every institution, every conviction, every public belief, and like faith in national pride. Like, you can't talk about what that is. There's no name for it because it's not happening. Don't look at it.
Yeah, and there are just limits to labels always, right? Yeah, I mean, to name right, something is to help in politics, of course, and categories are always broad brush by their very nature. I mean, this reminds me of, whatever it was 6 or 8 months ago, all the stuff about critical race theory and the
Rufo's thing on CRT.
Yeah,
exactly.
And it's like
he talks openly about it.
It was the same playbook. It was like, we don't teach critical race theory. Okay, well, let's talk about the phenomenon. Do you or do you not teach your third graders at X, Y, or Z public school? And does this or does it not come out of the pedagogical sort of theories of the education schools that, white kids are the historic oppressors and the history of America has to do with oppressors and oppressed? And it's all as simple as that. To even raise some objections to teaching third graders that way is somehow to, if you're on the right, is somehow to be guilty of not wanting to teach the history of race in America anymore. Whereas the objection was always this sort of ideological game of guilt and shaming and scapegoating on matters of race, starting at a very young age in schools. That's the main thing that we object to. And it is an ideological project. It is not an educational project. So anyway, it's just we've covered this ground well on this podcast before, but it's just the latest iteration of this kind of deflection.
Right. They don't like it when you raise the actual propositions at stake either. And as Rufo frequently says openly on Twitter, like, yeah, CRT, you could pick a different label for it, but you need something because otherwise you have to, like, what they want is for us to have to run through the definition of woke every time we would like to use the word to talk, frankly, about what's going on. And that's kind of why I feel like, okay, we can, like, put the definition out there just so that it's clear, we do have one. And as Seth says, we're not, like, theologically prohibited from developing one. That's not what this is about. But once you do that, I think you're just getting embroiled in like their very net when you say, like, yes, okay, so, well, maybe it's not quite wokeness, but what I object, blah, 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 like, whatever. They have their slogans, we have ours, but ours, I think, reflect the truth better than theirs. So there we are.
This inspires me to, encourage someone. Of course, it wouldn't work the right way, but it's just amusing that, the next time someone is called a fascist by a liberal on TV,
yeah,
well, define fascism, actually.
yeah. Well, it's Theodore Adorno's F scale.
Yeah,
that's really like, yeah, aggressiveness, working out too much. Well, okay, good. I'm glad that we talked about that one. Actually, it's kind of roundtable catnip, the rhetorical games of the left and the woke, which is a term we will go on using with confidence that it describes a real thing, and we don't like it. Okay, it's time for Read the Damn Site, which is our segment where we talk about the pieces that we particularly enjoyed from the week. And I'm going to call an audible, institute a new rule, which is that if you weren't on the pod last week, then you get to pick from the whole period that you haven't been around. So if you're reaching back 2 weeks, that is just fine. Survey the territory since you have last been on the podcast is basically, I guess, what I'm trying to say. And with that in mind, I am going to highlight a Joel Kotkin piece. I think this is the second time that I've highlighted a Kotkin piece, but I always profit from reading him. I feel like he has actual information, which not on our site, of course, but generally in like online commentary, actual information can be in short supply and huffiness and rhetoric can be in high supply. So Joel always comes with the facts and he draws interesting conclusions out of them. In this case, he's writing as part of a feature we're doing on the future of the American city. And the piece is titled Ex Urbia, meaning essentially that cities themselves as kind of dense centers suffering from all of the dysfunctions that they're currently suffering from, high rents, high crime, people working from home and wanting to leave, that signals a transition in American life to spreading out more widely, to living in exurbs and suburbs. And that all of this can be very good if not impeded by fruitless and hostile government intervention, and in fact could even be encouraged by a government that liked its people and wanted them to flourish. So exurbia makes me feel good as a having departed one of the big metropolises for a slightly more diffuse city, although Nashville is hardly an exurb, but I am kind of living outside of downtown, and I love it. I think everybody should do so, and this piece is a good explanation for why that might be a hopeful sign and a good thing. Joel Kotkin, Exurbia.
I'm going to cite as the piece that I think everybody should read. Similarly, it's part of the city's feature, After Gentrification by Stephen Ide. If you're not familiar with Stephen Ide's work, he always takes a really interesting perspective on questions of, he's a real expert on the history of homelessness, on mental illness, in an urban policy setting. But he's always got like really fascinating observations. For instance, like in this piece, he talks about in like New York, San Francisco, probably a few other cities, people talk about bikes and biking as though it's like the ultimate aspiration for like a certain type of, yimby yuppie type. But he points out that almost anywhere else in the country, it's like the most down market form of transportation. It basically means that your driver's license has been taken away, or that you can't afford to ride in a car. So it's like almost the whole country. It's like that. Like people would think it's odd if you travel everywhere on a bicycle. So this is he makes a lot of very kind of like kind of piquant little observations like that. It's a great piece.
Well, as a forever recovering law student, the process is never over. You are always a work in progress. I will be recommending Abusing the Class by Ted Frank today. Ted Frank is Director of Litigation at the Hamilton Lincoln Law Institute, and something that people don't hear a lot about, but it's actually quite important when you peer under the hood. There is a legal doctrine pronounced cypre in the United States. That is probably
is that how it's pronounced?
That is how Americans pronounce it. Yes. It is not pronounced Cyprus. It is not pronounced in any other number of ways. And what this doctrine means is that it's usually applied to charitable trusts. So like the March of Dimes is allowed to go on operating even though the polio vaccine happened. So it's a way of allowing organizations or interests to sort of outlive their original purpose legally, which sounds nice, but as Frank shows, it has been abused, and it has been abused in a way that is all too familiar. Basically, when courts make these big awards in big lawsuits, class action suits, eye-popping figures, dozens of millions of dollars, sometimes up to $100 million and above. maybe you've received one of these little notices in the mail that is like, hey, this lawsuit against this car company that you have one of these cars, so fill out this form and go to this website and check these boxes, and like maybe you'll get a share of the settlement, and it turns out to be like 60 cents in your bank account. Why is this happening? Well, one reason why it's happening is because courts have been allowing attorneys to direct the millions that they win not to the plaintiffs, not to the class, not to the shareholders, but rather to quote unquote nonprofit organizations and similar organizations that can just sit back and rake in the money. And so, surprise, surprise, not really. This is a great way of funding left-wing activism. So, just a couple quick examples. There was a suit against Monsanto for $35 million. 98% of the purchasers of the product that was mislabeled get $0. Berkeley Law School's Center for Consumer Law and Economic Justice and 2 other nonprofits get $16 million. That's more than the class members. Sometimes these things can be pretty eye-popping. It's like $100 million paid out in a suit against Altria, and $100 million goes to the preferred cause organization, and $30 million to the attorneys. Obviously, attorneys need to get paid in order to do jobs other Americans won't do. But some of these things are just extremely blatant. I mean, the American Federation of Teachers helped fund a suit over student loan servicing and ended up directing millions to a new advocacy group supporting their causes. It's as tawdry as you might expect, and there's an opportunity to change that. And if you want to know more about how that might go down, please do go ahead and check out Abusing the Class by Ted Frank.
Yeah, so even though I got Spencer's new rule / dispensation, that was directed at me, everyone. He said, if you weren't on the pod the week before, you can use the 2 weeks.
Anybody who happens to have not maybe been on the pod.
Yeah. It's like, no, this isn't a bill of attainder. It applies to the whole class, but the class is just you, sir. That was a deep cut lawyer's joke just for James. So I just want to redirect everyone to go read. If you haven't, Seth brought it up last week, I'm told, but Peachy's Hick Libs on Parade, Peachy Keenan, that is, where she talks about the phenomenon of the trickle-down effect of woke madness, especially in her piece on matters of sex and sexual identity, drag brunches in Topeka, etc. And click through. I would advise everyone to click through, especially parents, to click through a couple of her links to TikTok videos and sort of stare into the abyss of modern American cultural and parental pathologies. But then I'll add one more on just that this is a little unorthodox, and it's read the damn site, but not the American mind. There's a new issue of the Claremont Review books out, and I'm giving you now all who will hear this tomorrow. We always record on Wednesdays. You'll hear this on Thursday, the 23rd. Special access, which I can do as publisher, to a piece currently behind the paywall, but one that I wanted to highlight by Michael Anton. He has 2 things in this newest issue, a long exchange with Mark Halperin about his last essay, that is Anton's last essay about nuclear war in Russia. But the more interesting one in a way for me, and one that will get less play because it's a little more historical, is a review of a biography of George Kennan. The piece is called The Containment of George Kennan. So if you just Google Containment of George Kennan, Anton, Claremont Review Books, it'll pop right up, or you can just visit ClaremontReviewBooks.com. But Mike, Mike knows cold, the kind of history of the Cold War, among other things. He's read more than most people I know on all of this stuff, including tons of biographies. And Kennan's this interesting figure who's the darling of the modern, in some ways, still a huge figure amongst the modern foreign policy clerisy, which tends to be, for a variety of reasons, kind of centrist or left of center these days, including Republicans that are in it. And the subtitle of the review is George Kennan shared more opinions with today's, or the summary of it, George Kennan shared more opinions with today's populist right than with the contemporary left, which is an interesting thing to say considering Kennan, despised Ronald Reagan in various ways. But it's Mike, through this review, captures a lot of interesting history of the intersection of ideas, scholarship, and policy in foreign policy in the sort of post-war, Cold War era. It's an interesting portrait about a very interesting man, George Kennan, a very difficult man in many ways. And so, go enrich yourself. And as with a lot of stuff Mike writes, it's a pretty brisk read and with a lively style. So go check out The Containment of George Kennan. And I will unpaywall it right after this recording is finished. So it should be fresh for you all when you listen.
That's the kind of power that you can wield when you're the president and publisher. But I will say that as your friendly neighborhood dual citizen on both the American Mind and the CRB editorial team, I always appreciate a good log roll for CRB. And I agree, that's Mike's pieces are always great, but that one is really rich and interesting. I learned a ton that I did not already know. And with that, thank you all for listening to the Roundtable. If you would like to learn more about all of our projects, here are some websites where you can go to do that. You can read the damn site at AmericanMind.org. You can read the damn magazine at ClaremontReviewOfBooks.com, and you can save the damn country by going to dc.claremont.org. I will just mention that is the website where you will find the BLM funding database. It's at dc.claremont.org/BLM-funding-database, or just Google Claremont Institute BLM funding and you'll find it. There's also a piece at Newsweek, Americans Deserve to Know Who Funded BLM Riots, which explains a little bit more of the rationale and what this thing is. It's a very, very cool little, I guess I could call it a widget that you can sort of explore and find out valuable information that way. If you would like to donate to support the work that we do, we would be most grateful. You can go to claremont.org/donate, and we are always ready and willing if you would like to shout you out on the podcast, especially if you direct your donations straight at us here at the Roundtable. But we are also pro-sued here at the Roundtable, and so we support you if you want to stay anonymous. We won't tell anybody that you gave us your money. But we're very, always very grateful to our supporters, large and small. If you like this show, it really helps to spread the word. You can give us 5 stars on iTunes or Spotify. You can subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, or you can just keep whatever bad opinions and criticisms you may have to yourself. And that helps too. No, but do let people know. That's how we grow the show. Thank you so much for listening. Thanks to our production crew, Jake Gannon and Blaze Ebener, and we will talk to you all next week.